Sorry for the delay. I really kind of the first time I've used this particular interface and wanted to make sure that it worked well. My name's Kevin Folta. I'm a professor at the University of Florida, and uh, and I'm was asked to do the Build Up Dietitians questions today here on Friday, and glad to do that. I'm excited to be able to share my experiences with you in a lot of ways because of the things I've learned over the years as a scientist who's at the forefront of public communication, and the things I learned, things I did well, things that I did not so well, and how that can help you as a dietitian in both your communication with the public as well as communication with clients, and just some things that maybe cross over a little bit. So I'm happy to take questions here in the on the page. It's the first time I've used this particular interface, so I'm trying to be able to read them at the same time as participate as a live discussion. So give me one quick second here to pull up that page. It disappeared when I went live, so I don't have access to the questions. So the first thing that I was asked to do is provide you with information about who I am and why I do what I do. And I've been a professor at the University of Florida for 16 years, or no, 18 years. I work on molecular biology. I'm interested in the genomics and the genes that control small fruit flavors. We work mostly in strawberries. I'm also very interested in how light can be used to control how plants behave and develop, with an emphasis now on how we can apply what we've learned from biochemical circuits in controlled environment agriculture. So all these really cool indoor facilities that have plants growing inside. We also make new compounds that can do different things from random DNA information, and we have projects in everything from COVID on to new herbicides and lots happening in that space. I also at home live on a small specialty crop farm. So my wife is a farmer for a living. We have acres of fruit trees and fruits and vegetables. She's a one-woman operation, does amazing work, and we sell at farmers markets. So I help her out with that. And so my Saturday morning, I'm speaking with the public about food and about farming. And so I do get a lot of questions about nutrition, about agriculture, and that's where I really do keep current with opportunities to talk to the public about their concerns about food and farming. I also still maintain a vigorous presence online, trying to address information and concerns about food and farming. And I also do the Talking Biotech podcast every Saturday morning. It's not just about biotechnology, it's about many different topics. So, I guess it asked me here to talk about credentials. I have a PhD from the University of Illinois, Chicago, where I studied molecular biology. It was my terminal degree. I could tell you all about molecular biology events and everything from worms to yeast to Bacillus subtilis to cancer cells. So that's my formal training, and I've applied this to plants and agriculture in postdoctoral work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Been in Florida for 18 years, as I mentioned. So how did I get started in science communication? I got started in science communication when as an undergraduate in college. So I always liked the idea of public speaking. I never feared a spotlight. I always was happy to take on addressing people's interests and concerns in agriculture, and or in any topic, but in science, but in agriculture too. And I was very excited about the new technologies that were happening in the 1980s and early 90s, and that they were the technologies of genetic engineering, and the idea that you could move around genes, that you could change traits. This seemed to be a really exciting technology that I was excited to be able to participate in. I'm adjusting my camera here a little bit. Let me make sure I'm still on center. Hang on. Yeah, I'm still kind of on center. Okay, good. I'm slouching. um, this computer is always a trick to do. So I was very excited about that. And in being able to participate more effectively, I joined this forensics team in college. Not dissection of dead bodies or things like that. Forensics in the meaning to gather evidence or to have evidence-based discussions. And I did very well in forensics. I learned all about persuasion, and we did a lot of improv. I learned a lot about how to write comedy. I did a lot of interesting things because of that experience. But it was the immersion in persuasion um, and immersion in persuasion that really was most important, because that taught me how do you change hearts and minds. And that, plus stepping into the forum when I became a professor and speaking about genetic engineering, the GMO question, evolution, climate, um, water. These were all things that I got to discuss with public audiences. And, I became the go-to uh, scientist for activist groups, where they would say, we need to have a scientist. Folta's pretty cool. He, is very respectful. We'll take him. We'll put him on the panel. And so it'd be me and a guy from March Against Monsanto, a Reiki healer, an organic seed producer, and a Sasquatch expert. And then we would debate questions of science. So that's my background. Um, the, even currently, I'm not currently doing many talks anymore. I used to do about one a week for farm groups, for universities. We can talk about that if you like, but I've kind of pulled back from the public eyeball in many regards. Um, One of the questions I had was, what are some of the big myths about farming and ag that are driving you crazy right now? And probably my biggest ones are chemophobia. The fact that they say our food is toxic. And I see this every week at the farmer's market, that people will say, well, I don't want chemistry on my food. And, is it organically produced? That kind of thing. And for me as a scientist, and as someone who worries about my health, I've always been a healthy eater, and, was a competitive athlete for a long time. Um, I know what goes on a farm, and the trace amounts of chemicals that can be used to control insects or other pests or pathogens. And I understand that very well, and so I'm not afraid of it. But I don't like when groups like the Environmental Working Group, when others who are in this with an agenda, do what they do to stir fear and uncertainty in the public, when we need to be celebrating our great abundance of food and ensuring that more people can have access to it. That should be our big job. So that's the kind of thing that drives me crazy. The organic myth that just because it's produced a certain way with different chemicals means it's healthier. I love organic farmers. They're all over the farmers market. They do a great job, and it's tough work. I get it. I'm glad they have a market for what they produce, and I'm glad they get paid for what they do. It's fantastic. The problem is when they make claims that it's healthier, when there's no evidence to suggest that. All of our food is amazingly healthy, and we should be very fortunate and grateful for that. A question online is, thank you for your research advocacy for science and authored the. Oh yeah, okay. Thank you for your research, and it says that I authored the chapter in the book, Pseudoscience: The Conspiracy Against Science. Yeah, it was called Foodoscience, and it explored the pseudoscience in food space. So that book is a really good one, The Conspiracy Against Science. My chapter is very funny. I wrote this thing for this book, and it was absolutely horrible. I couldn't stand how dry it was. It was, written very academically, and, just not exciting, wasn't engaging. And I said, can I make it funny? And they said, go for it. And people who write reviews of the book always comment on that chapter as as being really entertaining. So it's worth checking out. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions that are out there, please submit. The other question I had here were, who are the good resources, websites, people to follow? Keeping in mind that dietitians have a little different background than what I do. And I think the most important thing is to identify a few people you really trust. And some of the folks that I follow, Stuart Smythe, Dr. Smythe's at University of Saskatchewan. He's an economist, very good information. Michelle Payne is outstanding, Payn. Michelle Miller has some good stuff. You can look at hashtag Ag Chat. I kind of steer clear of hashtag Ag Twitter. It gets a little more political and a little more biased that way. Um, but in food and farming, Rob Syke is a really good one. Saik. Rob, he's actually very immersed in farming, and there's dozens of farmers who are excellent to follow too, depending on whether you're interested in dairy or range cattle or crop farming. Um, for other science, I think Genetic Literacy Project is great. GMO Answers is really good. Farmer's Edge is a good one for Twitter. Rob Sharkey, Shark Farmer, is outstanding. So, but then follow your big agencies like your USDA. Those are really good. But more importantly, it's important for you to be identifying those trusted sources and then sharing what they do, and sharing them with your trusted communities, the people in the other dietitians on Build Up Dietitians, anywhere, just to continue to propagate the information from those groups with the groups that you trust. Help that information find its way into these other communities, and I think that's really important too. Um, the other really important thing right now, seeing as though we're in a global pandemic, is I encourage you to engage. And really, what I hope for you to do is learn as much as you can about COVID 19, learn as much as you can about the aspects that relate to your discipline around COVID 19, and take an active role in debunking information on social media. Right now, that information is extremely persuasive and it costs lives. And it takes a wave of good science and good evidence to overcome a nugget of pseudoscience. And you're part of that equation. And it's not my direct area of expertise, but I'm reading about it voraciously and I'm participating in those conversations. So I really would like you to do that if you could. Let's see. Another question here. You mentioned about chemophobia. Do you feel that talking to consumers in the market that you've been able to change hearts and minds? And I do. I think I do. But changing hearts and minds is not an easy process, because one of the most important things I've learned over the years is that facts don't really matter. Facts don't change hearts and minds. What changes hearts and minds are common interests and common values. And so when someone comes to the farm stand on Sunday or at the market on Saturday and they say, are you using only organic practices? And first I'll ask is, why do you ask that? What's your concern? And they'll talk to me about their concerns about chemicals or about whatever it is. And I'll say, I have exactly the same concerns. We're on the same page. We're both very interested in the same thing. I don't want my wife or my animals eating anything dangerous or toxic, and we'd never use something that was dangerous or toxic. And so let's talk about the chemistry that we do use and why it's important, why it supports sustainable practices and better food prices and more availability. And usually when I come at it from that standpoint, we don't have to talk about the metabolic fate of BT, or metabolic fate of whatever else we use. Copper. We use a lot of copper, which is perfectly allowable in organic as well. But any of the agents we do use, like fungicides, Captan is a good one because we have a lot of fruit trees, so you use fungicides. And we don't need to talk about that. We don't ever get there because they trust that we're doing the right thing. And I'll take a peach right off the table and eat it. It's without even washing it. I don't recommend that, but I do it as a demonstration because it shows that I trust the practices that we're using. So that's a big part of how we change hearts and minds. What it really boils down to, and I can wait for other questions, but I'll give you a quick thought about some of the other aspects of changing hearts and minds, is it's interesting. If you look at what's called the trust equation, the trust equation says trust comes from your competence, your reliability, and your intimacy divided by your motivations, your self-motivation. And so let's take that apart. Competence and reliability, your education, So do you know what you're talking about? And then reliability is, will you do it if you're asked? So a lot of competent people are not reliable. So do you know what you're talking about, and are you willing to do it? And then intimacy is the wild card. I think as scientists, whether you're a dietitian or a molecular biologist, intimacy is the problem. And intimacy just means the human connection, the rapport we have with a person we're trying to change. And that's where we fall short. So, how do we develop intimacy? We talk about that shared sense of community and value, the things that we have in common. And those are the things that when I'm asked those questions, we talk about that. You know, I don't want my family to have this. Do you want this from yours? Listening to people and understanding their concerns. That's why when they say, is this organically produced, I'll say, well, why would that be important to you? I want to listen before I'll talk to them, before I talk at them. The bottom of that equation was self motivation. What's in it for you? And for you to show them that you have exactly the same concerns, and that you would are also very interested in aspects of food and farming and how it affects health. It shows that you're on the same page. So to maximize your ability to change hearts and minds, you really have to look at the trust equation and look at that online. I think it makes us all very better in our in whatever field that we practice in. The last part about that is really where you do this. And I would really advocate for everybody to take a very aggressive position with getting into social media and really working hard to show good work, produce good content, share your expertise on videos, YouTube, blogs, whatever, and then amplify the content of others. So go to the folks you trust and amplify their work. I follow Build Up Dietitians because I have a lot of trust in the material I see there, and I amplify it. It's not my area of expertise. So I read it and I share it. And this way I'm exposing my followers, who maybe are more interested in nuts and bolts biology than they are of aspects of diet and nutrition, to credible experts who also publish compelling work. So that's the other thought there. So I think there was another comment that popped up here. It says, I think your rooster is a bonus for Facebook Live. Well, and the problem is I got too many damn roosters. I think I've got at least 5 and more on the way. I got a bunch of chicks that I got to deal with here, so figure out which ones are which. Another question. I know you've had a lot of issues with people trolling and attacking you. For dietitians who are being active, how would you advise dealing with people in groups or attack or troll them? Oh, this is so important. It's part of the reason I've had to step out of this. The attacks and trolling were so severe for so long and became so expensive for my university that my university had me cancel talks. They said, nope, you're not going. You're not talking here. You're not talking here. You're out. And for a university to sideline a professor who's been winning awards for communicating with the public was, I don't know how difficult a choice it was for them, but it was devastating for me. So how do you deal with it? And what you have to do is you have to remember that you're trying to create change for the right reason, and that your words and your participation is an element of that change. And even though things can be rough and rocky, the phrase that I learned that's most important is time will be kind. And that when we look at this from the rearview mirror from 5 years down the road, you'll see that you were right and that you survived it. And I'll tell you, 5 years ago, next month, an article appeared on the front page of the Sunday New York Times about me that was a targeted hit piece that was so sad. And when I read it today, I can't believe that it was written. And it changed everything for me. But at the time, I met with communications experts in crisis communication who told me, where do you need to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? And I said, I want to be an expert voice that has the ability to talk to people about these critical issues. And he said, if you're going to do that, you need to stay in the game, stay relevant, and keep discussing. Don't back down. Dial it up. do more good work. And so that's really my advice on this is if you're attacked or trolled, ignore the you have to let the trolls go. And I'll talk about that in a second. Do more good work. Dial it up. And remember, the trolls and the attackers and the dissenters, if you have them, it means you're doing a good job. The trick to remember is they're not your audience. Your audience is the sea of people, the moms who are at home, who with their kids, who, locked in a COVID situation, who is wondering, is this food safe? That's your audience. And or how do I properly provide nutrients? The dads that are making shopping decisions at times who don't know if something is something they should be feeding their kids. These are the folks that you need to be reaching, and they're wondering who to trust. They don't know. They don't know if it's the environmental working group or the food babe or whatever. They don't know. So you have to show them by taking the high road, being kind to the trolls and attackers, and by acknowledging and listening to concerns and saying and sharing your values. I understand where you're coming from. This is something I think about all the time. That kind of stuff. Um, but here's what I know as a trained dietitian. That's how you change all of the people who are watching the conversation, and that's really important. Um, Another one online from Lisa. Sadly, it seems the universities have bowed to financial incentives to promote pseudoscience rather than critical thinking, peer-reviewed science. And I have to say, I agree in a lot of ways. Many universities, even medical schools, are building these centers for integrative medicine where they bring in ideas like Reiki healing and acupuncture and other dubious disciplines that can't stand up to the rigors of Western medicine, and that when you look at the evaluation of many of the processes they bring in, it is sadly hazardous. Um, Pseudoscience kills. I have an old friend from junior high and high school who now is in stage 4 cancer, bladder cancer, because she chose a website that said she could medicate herself with marijuana and kill the cancer. It's not working for her very well, and now she's retreating to standard medicine, and she's going to undergo aggressive radiation and chemotherapy. So there are many hazards with allowing bad science to propagate. Let's see. So we got about a couple minutes left here. So just to wrap up things, get out and engage. Take it upon yourself as part of your job to create good content. And if you don't want to create good content, share the content of others. Share it with your followers and your trusted communities. Start by sharing values. This is what's important to me, and the things that I find most important. For me, it's about farmers being profitable, the environmental sustainability of farming, getting more nutritious foods to the people who need it, and taking care of food insecurity worldwide. That's what I'm in this for. And when you start with that, people realize you're on the same page. And when you're on that same page, all of the ideas and remedies and evidence you present has that common context that you're both there for the same reason, to solve a critical problem in food and farming. So maybe the last comment here says, "Yeah, great advice. Trolls aren't your audience." And don't forget to tell people how you can find you online and social media. Okay, so I guess I'll wrap it up here because that was a pretty good thing there at the end. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Folta, KevinFolta. You can reach out anytime at kevinfolta@gmail.com. I'm very happy to answer questions there as well. I do the Talking Biotech podcast, which is at talkingbiotechpodcast.com every Saturday morning. And don't let biotech disturb you. Don't be overwhelmed by that. If you're interested in about DNA science, about gene science, genomics, I break it down pretty good with the world's experts. Next week's is on prions, which is a fascinating example of an infectious agent that's not alive that you really should know about. So check out, and there's great stories about how food came to be, how breeding efforts turned wild weeds and wild plants into the food we have today. So many of them are on that too. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for listening, and I really appreciate Build Up Dietitians, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be part of this. So thank you very much. And, and